Good evening, everybody. You can do better than that. Good evening, everybody.
Good evening.
Thank you. On behalf of the John F. Kennedy Library Foundation and its New Frontier Network, it's my honor to welcome all of you today to this forum on changing political demographics. We're going to begin the forum with a short film marking the 50th anniversary of President John F. Kennedy's presidency.
A great change is at hand, and our task, our obligation, is to make that revolution, that change, peaceful and constructive for all.
The effort to improve the conditions of man is not a task for the few. It is the task of all nations.
We choose to go to the moon in this decade and do the other thing, not because they are easy, but because they are hard.
Peace is a daily, a weekly, a monthly process, gradually changing opinions, slowly eroding old barriers, quietly building new structures.
Change is the law of life, and those who look only to the past or the present are certain to miss the future. Every American ought to have the right to be treated as he would wish to be treated, as one would wish his children to be treated. Do not pray for easy lives. Pray to be stronger men.
And so, my fellow Americans, ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country. My fellow citizens of the world, ask not what America will do for you, but what together we can do for the freedom of man.
They did a great job on that. Again, good afternoon. My name is Steve Kerrigan, and in addition to my role currently as the Chief Executive Officer of the Democratic National Convention, which is, you may not know, it's just occurring down the road a piece, I am also, one of the best titles I bear is co-chair of the New Frontier Network at the John F. Kennedy Library. We are thrilled to be a part of the John F. Kennedy Library Foundation, the family that has brought so much to our country, and we are thrilled to really connect young political leadership and the next generation of political leaders together to really make sure we advance all the causes that we all care about. So I want to start also by recognizing Tom McNaught, the Executive Director of the Kennedy Library Foundation. And so many of our board members from the Library Foundation as well are here. Clap for them there. Tom led the clap for that one. And many members of the Kennedy family who are with us as well. This is your leadership and support have really made every aspect of the library happen and really made it thrive, especially this 50th anniversary of the administration. In his acceptance speech at a Democratic National Convention in Los Angeles some 52 years ago, coincidentally, which was the first acceptance speech held outside, which is better weather in Los Angeles this time of year. Senator John F. Kennedy of Massachusetts spoke of a new frontier. We stand today on the stage of a new frontier, he said. A frontier of unknown opportunities and perils. A frontier of unfulfilled hopes and threats. The new frontier of which I speak is not a set of promises, it's a set of challenges. It sums up not what I intend to offer the American people, but what I intend to ask of them. It appeals to their pride, not to their pocketbook. It holds out the promise of more sacrifice instead of more security. I'm asking each of you to be pioneers on that new frontier. It is a time, in short, for a new generation of leadership to cope with new problems and new opportunities. As the co-chair of the Kennedy Library Foundation's New Frontier Network, I am proud to be a part of this generation's response to President Kennedy's challenge. The New Frontier Network is a call to action for young leaders today who want to change the world in our generation as President Kennedy did in his, to advance President Kennedy's ideals of civic engagement and public service to new generations. And I invite those members of our new generation in the audience to join us. As part of this effort, the John F. Kennedy Library Foundation joined Harvard's Institute of Politics in creating the John F. Kennedy New Frontier Award to honor Americans under the age of 40 who are changing their communities and the country with their commitment to public service. The awards are presented annually to 2 exceptional individuals whose contributions in elective office, community service, or advocacy demonstrate the impact and the value of public service in the spirit of John F. Kennedy. And it is my great pleasure to acknowledge 2 recipients of the New Frontier Award who are with us this evening. Illinois Attorney General Lisa Madigan is General. There we are. Okay. And former Pennsylvania Congressman Patrick Murphy. I'm also delighted to welcome 2 recipients of the John F. Kennedy Profile and Courage Award who have joined us, Deborah Bowen and Elizabeth Redenbaugh. And in keeping with the theme of passing the torch to a new generation, I wanted to recognize the mayor of South Bend, Indiana, Peter Buttigieg, who in 2000 won the National John F. Kennedy Profile and Courage Essay Contest. Mayor? I don't know if the mayor made it, but I remember being at that ceremony. That was the year that now Secretary Solis won the Profile and Courage Award. And I remember Senator Kennedy saying to the now mayor that he expected someday to see him sitting next to him in the United States Senate. So maybe we'll see that. He's running for treasurer of Indiana right now. So maybe we'll see that someday, him in the Senate. This event, though, would not have been possible without the generous underwriting of Liberty Mutual. And I'll ask you all to join me in thanking Paul Matera of Liberty Mutual, also a board member of the Kennedy Library Foundation. Paul and Liberty Mutual are always, as a Bay Stater, they are always standing up for us and standing with us on so many important causes, and this is such a great evening to be here with you, Paul. So thank you, and thank Liberty Mutual. It's also my great pleasure now to introduce another great Bay Stater, someone who is one of our hosts here also in Charlotte, and we are grateful as a community down here in Charlotte to have such a great leader amongst us, Ann Finucane, Bank of America's Global Strategy and Marketing Officer and a member of the John F. Kennedy Library Foundation's Board of Directors. It was Ann who we turned to when we were looking to host this forum and reception, and Ann, as she does often, without hesitation, stepped up and said, we'll take care of it. We'll give you a venue. We'll house you right here on the bank's property, and we couldn't be more happy to be here. So Ann, welcome. Thank you, everybody. After you.
Thank you, Steve. I don't think there's, are you a little busy here? Trying to, you went to extreme lengths to move people out of the Bank of America Stadium. So we thank you for all that you've been able to do for the city of Charlotte and for the state of North Carolina. You know, when a convention comes to town, whether it is political in nature or otherwise, it brings fabulous things to a community in terms of the restaurants, the hotels, the taxi drivers, the wait staff. So the economic development it brings to a city is really terrific. And the fact that it would be the Democratic National Convention and that we would be able to host the JFK Library Forum is just all the better for us. So thank you very much. And I want to welcome those of you who are not from Charlotte to this city. This is our headquarters city, and one we are very proud of. We have more than 15,000 people that work in and around the Charlotte area for Bank of America, and all welcome you. I'm just simply their spokesperson for the day. And I want to also say a special thanks to Paul Matera, myself, who joins us from Liberty Mutual. It is the kind of contributions that Liberty Mutual has made, along with other corporations, that keep the Library Foundation going, and that is truly terrific. It would be, before we get going, I think it's important that we did say we had members of the Kennedy family here, but I do see a few, so I would like to acknowledge them, and if you could stand up. We have Victoria Kennedy here. And for those of you who saw it, and for many of just a few who may have missed it, wonderful tribute last night to Ted Kennedy and all that Edward M. Kennedy was able to do for the state of Massachusetts and for the country. And we have here with us a special guest, a couple of them actually, Patrick Kennedy. And, oh, did we lose your son, Owen?
And he's the demographic change we're talking
Exactly. He's the Patrick Kennedy, former congressman and a son of Ted. And have I missed a family member? No? Okay. So with that, I will move on. Listen, we believe very strongly in the idea of the public-private dialogue and advancing as honestly as we can in the kind of public discourse that the Library Foundation and the library itself has advanced for the last many decades, and particularly in the last decade. And Bank of America is proud to be, among others, an underwriter of those forums. And I think that you'll see today the kind of energy that JFK not only brought to his administration, to a country, for a legacy, but also what we feel in Massachusetts in terms of a library, a place of research and study, a museum, a place to visit, and a forum which allows for present-day dialogue and sometimes spirited dialogue throughout the year. And for all of that, we are grateful as Bostonians and people from Massachusetts, and also we hope that for those of you who are from other parts of the country, that you will come to Massachusetts and to come to see the library, the museum, and enjoy in its rich benefits. So, it's with that that I would now introduce today's program, because it too is intended to give you a sense of what we participate on a regular basis here in Charlotte, programs that invite and inspire new generations to participate in shaping our future, offering pathways to turn ideas into action. So with that, it's now my pleasure to welcome to the stage our distinguished panelists. So please give a warm welcome to our moderator, David Gregory from Meet the Press, our panelists, Massachusetts Governor Deval Patrick, New York Times Magazine chief. I will try not to, okay, so our moderator, David Gregory, our panelists, Massachusetts Governor Deval Patrick, who we're particularly proud of, New York Times Magazine chief political correspondent, Matt Bai. We have, sorry, Maria, you're first. Dewey Square Democratic strategist, Maria Cardona, and you'll also see her as a contributor on CNN, so, and
for this panel.
And CNN Espanol, sorry. And Facebook co-founder and now publisher of The New Republic, Chris Hughes. Welcome. And with that, I will pass the baton to you, David.
Thank you. Thanks very much. Welcome, everybody. Hope you're enjoying the convention. If you love politics and you care about the outcome and the direction of the country, then you love being at a convention. You love being in the middle of what is the high-stakes time of this campaign. We are about to officially begin this fall campaign in earnest. Once we get through this convention, we're in a tight race, so there's a lot on the line. What I'd like to do is talk a little bit about this moment, stay up to the date on the news of the day, President Clinton speaking tonight, anticipation for President Obama tomorrow, where we see this race, but also where we see the electorate and where we see politics today. I mean, let's understand that the context in which this campaign is happening is extreme dysfunction in Washington and our political system, the outsized influence of outside money into the race, and a changing electorate that has profound implications for policy and for politics, or does it? So these are some of the questions I think we'd like to explore, and it's a great group to do it. We're going to have, I think, a free-flowing conversation, and we'll take some of your questions as well at the end of the panel. Governor, I'd like to start with you. You energized the hall last night. That's right. Oh, yes. You energized the hall last night with your speech, and there's a lot that's being made of what the goals are here for the party and for this president, a kind of reintroduction which any incumbent goes through. And you said a couple of things that struck me. You talked about the need for the Democratic Party to have a backbone in the face of some of the Republican issues. And you said something even more pointed when you said, I don't want this president to be bullied out of office. Tell me why you chose to phrase it that way, and what was the real motive behind it and the message behind it to fellow Democrats?
Well, the message is what I said. There wasn't a sort of subtext. I really feel, first of all, that as a proud Democrat, I am a proud Democrat. I'll also say Democrats get on my last nerve. We are sometimes the first ones to believe the Republican talking points, and we act as if politics is just a competition among sound bites instead of about a vision for the future and the kind of country and community we want to live in. It's a cliche to say that elections are about the future, but in fact they are about the future, and it's incumbent on parties and candidates to articulate their vision of the future. And so today, I think, and maybe it's always been this way, there's been a real tension in this country about what we want the role of government to be. Rarely, in my view, and I'd be really interested to hear what the other panelists have to say, has the division been about whether we should have government have a role or no role at all. And it seems to me Democrats need to assert our belief that government has a role to play, not in solving every problem in everybody's life, but in helping people help themselves, and help themselves in particular to the American dream. So that was my message. I think that's, by the way, what this president has been about. And I think that's what his, more to the point, his agenda has been about. And we need, and he needs, and the campaign needs, I think, to really hammer away at that, so we're giving people a reason to vote for a second term, not just a reason to vote against the other guy.
Chris Hughes, do you think that the president in some ways has been bullied by such an organized opposition to him on the role of government, the assertion that government is actually critical to economic growth, which is his view and certainly been the thrust of his policies?
I think that's certainly true, but I don't think that there's anything particularly unique on that count about this election cycle than the ones before. What I feel like is more unique is just the sheer amount of money that is playing in these elections because of Citizens United, because of super PACs, and because of the current state of the campaign finance laws in our country. It's very, very difficult for any of the messages to really rise above anything that's not negative and tearing down, and actually put forward a more hopeful sort of productive agenda. That said, I think that particularly in the last week or two, we've seen the president and we've seen really the party start to coalesce around, a set of key accomplishments that the administration has made. Say, bailed out the auto industry, ended the war in Iraq, came out for marriage equality, created 4.5 million jobs. The list is long, but having that list and beating it in every single speech, in every single moment that it's possible, I think does have the opportunity to put sort of a forward message out there that can inspire people to get involved.
You have to look forward, Maria, but look, let's be honest. I mean, everybody that I talked to on the Obama team is emphasizing the need, and I thought that the First Lady attempted to do it last night with her speech, and the message was, do you remember what you first liked about President Obama? So my question is, where was it lost? Because it seems to me President Obama, in the view of many, has become the worst thing you can become, which is a Washington figure. He is, after all, President of the United States.
That's very true. And I think what we saw last night was certainly the First Lady doing a couple things brilliantly. And I think, obviously, with the setup that you gave her and then the brilliant speech by Julian Castro, and I'll get to that in a moment about what he was able to accomplish. But I think what she did was, she did remind voters what it is about him that everybody fell in love with. And she did it on a very personal level. She shared what it was like to be at home with him. She shared what the experience was of him as a father, as a husband, as a life partner, even as a former suitor. And what's interesting is, and I've talked a lot about this on TV today, and so the Republican comeback is, well, but we already know the president. But the fact is, to your point, David, people have become a little disenchanted, and they do see him as different than what he was 4 years ago. So I think what she actually did, even though we know him, was incredibly important to remind us all, to make us comfortable once again that he actually hasn't changed, that it's the politics around him that have changed. And so therefore he has had to move the way that he does things, the way that he gets things done in Washington. And he actually said it in several interviews in terms of what he was going to do in the next 4 years in terms of working with Republicans. He was no longer, this sort of post-partisan person talking about, how he was going to bring everybody together and feel the love. He said, look, I will talk to Republicans and work with them on anything that we can work together on. But if they don't want to work with me, I'm going to go around them. And I thought that was just a huge contrast.
Again, I think the bigger point here, and I think it began with Governor Patrick, is asserting leadership, asserting role of government, asserting the president's own leadership. Matt Bai, the knock on this president is not inability to achieve. It was that achievement politically did not produce desired results. They got a huge stimulus. Not as big as some liberals hoped. They got a huge stimulus. They got a financial regulatory overhaul. They got health care. They took some big swings at the plate, and yet the economy is still in a pretty distressed state. Is there a leadership vacuum that he's trying to address in this convention?
Sure. Well, if I can just step back for a second, David, and say I just want to say how honored I am to be part of the program, because I appreciate very much the Kennedy Library, which I think is just about the most inspiring place for politics on the planet, and appreciate being on a panel with people whose accomplishments I really admire. So I'm glad to be here. I watched your speech last night, Governor. I wanted to get up and volunteer when it was done, and then I realized there'd be repercussions for that. And I can't actually. And if those Times Watch people are here tweeting, that was a joke. At any rate, thank you for doing this. I do think, obviously that's the core problem, right? If the economy turns around, then none of this is really a problem for the president. But look, I think, I don't know if bullied is the right word, but I get what the governor is getting at, and I completely agree. They are in a bunker mentality. This happens to presidents. It happens when things aren't going well. And I know of times where President Clinton, said to his folks, we can't live in a bunker. We have to engage. I was very disheartened. I'll put in a small plug, but I just finished a cover on the economy in Ohio and who created improvement and progress in Ohio. And I was very disheartened that while the governor of Ohio was more than happy to take credit and the Romney campaign is more than happy to talk, the White House and the campaign were just in fits of paralysis in trying to figure out how to engage or whether to engage on this. They were not willing to make the president or the vice president available simply to say our policies created this progress in Ohio. I find that both dispiriting on a civic level, but also troubling on a political level for the reasons you're describing. Look, I think he does have a record. He does have accomplishments, and there is an argument about whether government has a role or not. He's running against a party that is not really anti-tax any longer; it's anti-revenue. It's anti-government. That's a significant evolution in the debate, or devolution in the debate. And so I think it is frustrating to me that for all the 30-second ads and the attempts to rebrand Mitt Romney and fire up the base, there is not. To my mind, Chris, there's not yet been a really serious effort to go out and win the debate about what they've achieved and what they can achieve 4 years later, and they are running out of time.
And Governor, look who is look who is the featured speaker tonight, who's getting kudos from Paul Ryan today. Bill Clinton, 69% favorable rating in the new Gallup survey, who is most well known as a Democrat for saying the era of big government is over. And yet he is thrust as the one to really sort of make the closing economic argument.
Well, first of all, to Matt's point, and a little bit afield of his point, although I want to come back, President Obama hasn't reintroduced an era of big government. What he hasn't done, to my satisfaction anyhow, is hammer away about those accomplishments. It's the bragging part of the job. And I get that. By the way, what's ironic, and I've told some of the folks in this room this story about when the president came to visit Massachusetts about a year before my own reelection, which felt on a smaller scale a lot like the elements and environment that the president is facing today. And he asked me how I was feeling about the coming campaign. And I said I was looking forward to it except for two things. I hate asking people for money, and I hate the bragging. And he looked at me in the eye and he said, Deval, he said, get over it. And I got over it. And I feel like I want to have said to the campaign, you folks need to get over it too. Because the fact that, well, I mean, that's the point. It's not that we are ready to declare victory. Recovery is a journey. And I think one of the reasons why we struggle as Democrats is that we want to acknowledge the progress we have made. At the same time, we want to acknowledge the folks who are still suffering. But there's no doubt but that this president has had an extraordinary record, even more so when you consider obstruction as a political strategy from congressional Republicans, which I do think is a relatively new phenomenon.
Will this president, should this president, when he has this opportunity tomorrow night, speak in a detailed and forward-looking and robust way about combating poverty in this country?
Gotta hope so. But I'll tell you, I think
where and when is he going to do it? I mean, there are a lot of critics, as you know, in your own party who say this is not a president who has taken on big urban problems like poverty and violence going on in his own home city. I think 4 people shot just a couple of weeks ago from his South Side home in Chicago, you know, a city that's experienced a real violence crisis.
Well, David, I don't want to be the only one here speaking for the campaign, and I love you, but what you just said is factually wrong. The president's emphasis on education is all about poverty. It's just that it's not only about poverty. But I can tell you from my own life, and you know a little bit of my own story, it was education that lifted me and my family out of poverty. It's always been what's lifted Americans out of poverty. The race to the top was precisely about creating tools and an environment for us to do the kinds of things that I talked about last night in the Orchard Gardens School. So I don't think that is right. I do think that, I mean, in fairness, I disagress with the characterization.
I'm just raising questions here.
I do.
I mean, you're not the first one to take me on.
I do. Just I want to be invited on the show again. I do think that we all struggle a little bit with the, and for reasons that I think that we are also all struggling with around the gun question. You know, it's a pretty straightforward point to me to say, you know, why have military weapons on you know, in neighborhoods? But even in Massachusetts, I have tried to move for 2 terms now a 1 gun a month bill. Listen to that. 1 gun a month, right? Limiting purchases to one. And in a Democratic legislature, you know, we haven't been able to get any traction.
I think part of what the trap that Democrats have fallen into is trying to have this debate on the terms that the Republicans have set out. Because I do think we're so afraid to have them have their sound bites out there without any response from us. But I think what we haven't been able to do, and this just drives me nuts, when we talk about his accomplishments or his goals, for example, on education, on health care, on student loans, on all of these things, Republicans immediately will go to, oh, well, those are just side issues, those are distractions. What people really care about are jobs and the economy. The economy, for God's sake, all of those things are all about the economy, are all about your personal economy. If you don't have a good education, you're not going to have a job. And so I think that is where the president can go tomorrow night. And I think critically important is that is where he can make sure to continue to draw in the enthusiasm of the minority communities that we know he's going to need to win. And specifically, I'll mention the Latino community, which, by the way, Julian Castro was masterful last night in really lighting that enthusiasm fire that I think is going to burn from here till November as a Latina immigrant from Colombia. Some of the lines that he used in his speech were just, I mean, it brought me to tears. And what was so incredible about that, though, it's not just the Latino immigrant story. That's the quintessential American story.
Matt, Chris,
I mean, to be fair to your point, I totally agree in spirit that, you know, healthcare, the education, all of that is about jobs and the economy. I do think, though, that it is hard to deny that the Republicans do have a point that with unemployment at 8.3%, Americans are really still hurting. I think we probably have a consensus that that's the case now. And I do think that the administration is in a difficult position to really articulate what it's going to do to create jobs in the short term. I mean, with the manufacturing numbers that are out this week, we'll see what the numbers are like on Friday. The fact of the matter is no one really knows where the national economy is going to go, particularly with all the instability in Greece. So I think, you know, more time, whether it's, you know, words that no one wants to hear, but whether it's an additional stimulus, whether it's additional mortgage relief, you know, there are big questions about what a second term would look like. And I do think that there's an opportunity to lean into that and to say that there's a route, you know, from here to an unemployment rate that is much more in line with the historical standards. Even though,
I agree with that.
To the extent there's enormous progress has been made given the depth of the, you know, depression in the first place.
Matt, let me bring you back to tonight and tomorrow night. What do you expect from President Clinton, from President Obama? How do they want to use these incredibly important 2 nights?
Well, you know, I actually wrote a column about this morning, and I found it interesting and a little puzzling, the lineup tonight. and I'll get some disagreement, I understand, but he has, you can only accomplish, it's like a convention's a little bit like a great column. You get about one or two things you get to say, and that's it. You can only accomplish one or two things. And the question is who he is speaking to in his lineup and who he's going to speak to tomorrow night. And I thought it was interesting, the juxtaposition of keynotes of major speakers tonight, where you have President Clinton, who represents to me one strain of liberalism. President Clinton, who preached again and again, you cannot be a party that loves jobs and hates business. And Elizabeth Warren, on the other hand, who was very much a symbol, I think, of rebuke of the Clinton era and of the excesses of Wall Street and the financial industry. And it makes me wonder, as an observer, who do they think they're talking to, and what do they think that message is? I am not a strategist. No one's going to pay me to run their campaign. Governor Patrick doesn't want my advice and shouldn't take it. But that doesn't stop me from occasionally tossing it out there. Because why should I be different from anyone else? And in my very humble view, this has to be about independence. Look, he won all of these swing states in 2008 in a remarkable moment with a formula that, let's face it, cannot be replicated. He did not run as a traditional Democrat. He ran almost as an independent. He ran in a moment where he embodied some kind of change that was outside the party system at a moment of deep fatigue with the status quo. He got historic levels of turnout from African-American voters, minority groups, younger voters. He also managed to win a much more sizable segment of independent voters than the last couple of Democratic nominees had gotten. He is now running as a traditional Democratic candidate. He has a traditional Democratic map. He is a Democratic president. He's not this great figure of change. He can't be. It was unrealistic. And because of that, something's got to give in that formula. He's not, in my view, going to get that kind of turnout. They can open 1 million field offices and give out, free big #1 hands to everybody who comes. It's not, you can't replicate that moment. There is no lightning in a bottle twice. He's got to win some sizable segment of the independents who gave him a hearing and who polls show have been largely disillusioned. If you're not speaking to those voters in a persuasive way tonight, tomorrow night, I don't think you're accomplishing what you need to accomplish.
But Bill Clinton is speaking in prime time, and he's speaking
clearly
to those.
That's where they're.
I mean, it's been described to me that Clinton is the best closer there is on the economic argument, which is going to be a protect the middle class argument. But to Matt's point, I don't know that he can solve the Obama administration's problem with the business community, which runs very deep. And I'm hearing that for the past 2 days from loyal Democrats who are so angry they can barely contain themselves.
Well, I think if anybody can help to fix it, and I agree with you, I don't know that he can fix it 100%, but it is certainly Bill Clinton that can go a long way towards doing that. I mean, this is a guy that CEOs and business people really do like, and they see that he understands them. And for him to get up there and basically be the biggest surrogate for the president, and frankly say that he knows what the president is doing is going to work because frankly he did it and it worked, I think is going to be very powerful, not just to those business people, but to the important independents that you talked about, to the important disaffected Democrats in terms of enthusiasm that love Bill Clinton. And interestingly enough, you hear all of these things about, Bill Clinton, the consummate liberal, and he really wasn't, as we all know. And so I think that history has a way of kind of rewriting itself in the way that he's become so beloved to the base, when in fact he was such a centrist president. So I do think he can go a long way towards doing that, and I think that was exactly the point for the campaign to put him in prime time for that.
Let me get you on that, Governor. So if a part of what Matt was talking about is that Senator Obama captured a traditionally Republican vote, which was white, highly educated, making income over $100,000 in the suburbs, in the exurbs. If that man or woman is watching tonight and watching tomorrow night particularly, what does President Obama have to say to reach that voter?
Well, I'm not a strategist either.
Well, somebody's got to be a strategist.
Yeah, but it doesn't have to be somebody on this panel. Maybe that's your
I know.
Sorry. I think that this president, I know that this president isn't running, due respect to Matt's point, to be president of the Democrats. He's running to be president of the United States, and he understands his role as serving the people who agree with him and the ones who don't. You know, when you say, Matt, he's running as a traditional Democrat, that health care reform plan is right out of the Heritage Foundation. It's a market-based. I know, because
I'm talking more about the map.
No, I got you. So now I was coming to that, but I'm talking about on the policy choices. They aren't all obvious, you know, kind of classic government solutions. The race to the top is not about government solutions. It's really about sort of blowing up traditional ways of thinking about the classroom and trying some new things. It's enormously high impact. I think that that on the science of it, you know, the segmenting of the electorate that people do, you know how it works. We got to talk. Right.
And it's kind of funny to pretend you don't know how it works.
No, but I mean, I know it, but I don't do it.
I understand.
And this is where I'm
understand.
going. This is where I'm going. And I actually feel quite strongly about this. There are a couple of my constituents and supporters here who know that I'm consistent on this point. This business of saying, you know, we got to reach that group over there and say one thing to them and something else to them over there, instead of saying, this is who I am and what my core is, and this is what I believe, and I want you to see your stake in that. That message is what the president brought in the first campaign, because that's who he is. And it was a transcendent message. And I think it's still a powerful message, even as divided as the nation is.
Chris,
and I think that's what he has to talk about.
So let's talk a little bit more about demographics, about identity politics. Not in the way that you're discussing, but in some of the demographic changes, how the electorate is changing. Chris, as you think about young people, I mean, I think about, you know, the history of President Kennedy inspiring a younger generation, not only into service, but into civic activism. And President Obama had a similar effect of bringing new people into the political process. And here you are 4 years later. Where do you think that a lot of the young people that you know and that you interact with, how are they feeling about politics that in the middle of a very negative race with so much outside money, and as I pointed out at the top, at a time when institutionally, government's not working very well at the federal level?
I mean, I think the challenge with young people and a lot of the demographic groups that overwhelmingly support Democrats is getting them organized. I think that, you know, there's this question of enthusiasm, which there was certainly plenty of in 2008. You could make arguments, and certainly the party is at a different place in 2012. Obama is a different candidate than he was in 2008. But to be able to take advantage of young people and minority groups, you know, demonstrated loyalty to the Democratic Party, you have to get them organized. And what I think, and where I probably disagree with Matt a little bit, is that this campaign, just Obama for America this time, is incredibly well organized, particularly when it comes to the integration of field and technology. It's a story that has not been told nearly as often because it's not quite as sexy as a more simple social media story, the one that was told in 2008. But the Obama campaign has not only re-engaged the millions of volunteers and activists that were part of it in 2008, but they've grown those ranks. You see this in the number of donors in the campaign. It's now up to 3 million, whereas at the same point in the previous cycle, even with a competitive primary, it was at 2 million. The average donation is a very small amount. They have thousands of field offices out there. And maybe most importantly, the iPhone app is not built around buzz or really, you know, pushing any particular message, but instead calling your friends in battleground states or even walking and knocking doors in your neighborhood. Some of the, you know, again, not as sexy techniques to get out the vote, but those that I think are really, really important for young people and for other voters who are less likely to get out there. It's not going to necessarily make up for the different election cycle that we have now in 2012 than we did in 2008. But I also think that there's a real structural advantage there that few people have noticed or are commenting.
But I guess my question is, organization is certainly important, but you can be organized. You have to be organized around something, around a core set of ideas, and around, you know, idealism that isn't faded, born of experience. So where do we stand on that score?
You know, I'm really with Governor. I really appreciate what Governor Patrick was just saying, and I'm really with you on this. At least, you know, once a week, if not more, somebody writes to me, and I think it's because in 2004 I wrote about turnout I did a lot of work on Republican and Democratic turnout in that election in Ohio. And so at least once a week, somebody writes to me, probably some people in this audience, and say, you know, you got this app or this application, this kind of polling or this kind of, where they figured out how to find the guy who owns Nissans, but this kind of golf club and by the kind of house he has and what time of day he goes out. And now they know how he's going to vote for sure, and they've scanned his brain. And, you know, I really, it doesn't interest me. I'm not saying it's not important. It doesn't interest me as a political. It's not why I got into this. Because I think these things matter at the margins. I think there's a point here, a point there. I think they can push, they can close a small gap. But I think the campaign is about something larger. And you know, what I'm talking about when I say you can't, it's not that the campaign isn't well organized. It's at the moment in America and the map now have reverted to something I think more familiar, so that you can push those numbers a little bit, but you can't necessarily catch it where it was. And also that I think the inherent contradiction of the Obama campaign and the Obama presidency, right, the hope and change, is that everybody got to see in it what they wanted. And core liberals got to see in it a progressive, you know, Howard Dean in a more palatable way, you know, a guy who was going to go back to our liberal ideals. Independents looked and said, here's another pragmatic Clintonian Democrat. The president very purposely allowed both of those impressions to go forward. He had never governed as an executive and therefore had never had to define his own philosophy. I frankly don't know how clear he is on where he falls on that spectrum. And I think in the White House, they've had a very hard time choosing direction, choosing philosophy. You know, on one hand, he's hammering out the grand bargain with Speaker Boehner and coming very, very close. You know, on the other hand, he's going after Wall Street and their fat cats and their executive pay. There's an inherent inconsistency in trying to please everybody. And I think Governor Patrick is right. I think authenticity matters a lot. And what I would like to see in President Obama tomorrow, and I do think this is what would appeal to those independents, so I don't think there's any contradiction here. I both as an observer, you know, as a citizen, I would like to see him make a very strong, heartfelt argument for what he believes and what he intends to do. I think it's missing.
Ray, I want to pick up on that point. You know, I had Carly Fiorina, who's a Republican, former head of Hewlett-Packard, on the program, and she took issue with the focus on the gender gap and the focus on women's health issues by saying it's wrong for women to become a special interest group and for this to somehow turn on social issues like abortion, that women are a lot larger and less monolithic than that. Same is true, of course, of the Latino community. We say so easily, it falls off our lips, fastest growing voting bloc in the country, such an emphasis on immigration reform or the lack thereof. But there is this kind of segmentation in our electorate that gets away from the hard truth about governing, and that it's hard, and that it often it achieves smaller results than bigger results every time, which seems inconsistent with that huge expectation that we have in our politics right now.
Absolutely. And let me just go back to one point that we've sort of touched upon, and that is the sort of impossibility of expectation that this president basically took office in when he was elected. I mean, I wrote a piece the day right after basically saying there's no way this man is going to live up to everybody's expectations, because he basically got elected to be all things to everybody. And you're right, he kind of let that sit. But to your point, I think Republicans love to make that argument when it comes to women's issues, certainly when it comes to Latino issues. I hear it all the time, that the reason that Mitt Romney is going to be able to capture more of the Latino vote is because he's talking about jobs in the economy, and the unemployment rate among Latinos is higher than among the general population, and that is certainly true. But I think what they are failing to understand, or frankly don't have an answer to, is that voters don't go into the voting booth and vote on one single issue, right? I mean, they don't go in there basically saying, oh, you know, well, maybe Mitt Romney has a better economic understanding, right? And we've seen this in a lot of polls, than President Obama, so I'm going to vote for him. No, voters go in there because we're human and because we do have other issues that interest us and that we care about. You're going to go in there making sure that you know where the candidate stands on these other issues. I call them filter issues because that's what immigration has become for Latinos. And what that means is that if you don't like, immigration is not the #1 issue for Latinos. It rarely has been, though it is sort of rising, especially when there was all the vitriol among Republicans when they were talking about it. But it's a filter issue, which means that if a candidate or a party is not speaking in a respectful way, a solutions-oriented way about fixing immigration reform, they're not going to listen to you on anything else. And I think the gender thing has also become somewhat of a filter issue, which means that I could be an independent woman and I go into the voting booth and I say, you know, again, like I said before, you know, Mitt Romney seems like he might have a better plan on the economy, but God, I can't stand that the Republicans think that they know better than I do on decisions when it comes to my body. And I think that can sway, and it will sway.
As somebody in office, somebody who has to govern, when you look at these two conventions side by side, and I'm not going in that direction in terms of choice. I'm going.
Do I have to?
No, I'm talking about the diversity. I mean, you do look at more and more diversity in the Republican Party, more and more diversity in the Democratic Party in terms of people holding elective office, and yet we still seem to have such huge political and policy stalemates in terms of the issues that you would think would follow some of the change in demographics. Do you see that?
Well, I wasn't in Tampa. You were there.
Yeah.
And I didn't watch much of Tampa, but I remember Diane saying at one point that it seemed like all 6 black Republicans were actually on the program in Tampa, and when you spanned the audience, that nobody else was there.
And Latinos, by the way.
And Latinos.
They were all speaking.
The Republican Party isn't monolithic either. I get that. I do think that the Democratic Party has on purpose tried to open its agenda to the kind of America we are becoming, and I think that's been true for decades now. It hasn't always been true historically, but it's been true for decades, and it's one of the reasons why I am a Democrat. I will say, and I just want to come back to a point that Chris was making about the use of technology as an organizing tool. One of the things that has been, again, my scale is much smaller than the national scale you guys work on and comment on, but the grassroots, the old-fashioned grassroots idea was that you go and you meet voters where they are in every sense of the term, where they live and work and play and worry. And that even if you don't think you're going to appeal to them, the gesture of respect shown by showing up has its own political impact. And what technology has done, and the Obama campaign has figured this out, is to sort of hyperdrive that ability to go at the grassroots. And that was the edge the last time. I think it's going to be the edge this time, too.
I mean, I think so, too. I mean, and to Matt's point earlier, it's not that I necessarily think that microtargeting is, and I don't think it's what any of us were saying, that microtargeting is going to, sway this election. I think it's much more about taking the technology and integrating it into the supporters' experience with the campaign, down to the level of the app or the level of BarackObama.com being immediately customized, and having it be consistently easy to reach out to the people you know or could know on behalf of the campaign. It's not. It is still just numbers, but in last year it was 50. I mean, in 2008 it was 53-47. This time, by all accounts, it'll be 50, 49, 49, whatever, and that can make the difference. It's one piece of
and I do think the Republican turnout effort is probably far lacking behind that. I mean, traditionally it did. Bush kind of amped it up for with a program for a cycle or two, and I haven't looked into it all that deeply, but you have the sense going out into the states that they are running a more traditional Republican campaign that's not so reliant on grassroots, which may end up costing them.
Do you mind if I make one more point on this? It's probably too soon to say, but I think this campaign will go down, this election cycle will go down as one of the great examples of wasted hard right money in human history. All this money being spent to tear people down, and the polls have hardly moved at all on account of it. And I think what it has accomplished is shutting people off and turning them off from the process rather than motivating them to do one thing or another. If you bring back on top of that what we're talking about in terms of the grassroots effort, that actually creates an edge for re-engaging people. And if we do what we should do from this convention going forward, back to where we started this conversation, talking about our path forward, talking about an optimistic agenda and a specific one, building on a record of accomplishment. I think that's how we make the argument, and I think it's a winning argument.
But what's the way out of this, Matt? I mean, you know, you and I are covering these issues and don't have a stake in it. We all have stake as citizens, but I mean, we're doing our jobs as journalists. But what's the way out of this? Because I happen to be, I mean, there's a great desire to get beyond some of the micro-targeting. But I mean, I hate to sound cynical, but that's exactly what both campaigns are doing. And if President Obama were to fall a bit short in his speech and coming out of this convention and he continues on this path, they will look and do all the metrics to grind this thing out just based on their key coalition of how they get over the finish line. And that's exactly what they'll do. It's what campaigns do. So my question is specifically to the governor's point on the money. Is there a way out of this? Is President Obama's reelected? What does he do? Where does he start on dismantling the super PACs? You would think there'd be some bipartisan consensus for that, or given how Republicans have done, maybe not.
Well, look, I'm not Pollyanna, so I don't want to suggest that the system is fine as it is. I don't think it's fine as it is. And if I could wave a magic wand, I'd change it dramatically. But I do think this is the single most effective form of campaign finance reform that is available to the system, is going to be the acknowledgement that after a certain point, which is probably in the hundreds of millions of dollars, it's an obscene amount of money, but after a certain point, there's just too much and it doesn't matter. It's like the arms race. How many nuclear bombs do you need to blow up one city, right? How many ads do you need? How many ads can people watch, absorb? I do think it's wasted money. Now, I think the threshold for effective advertising is too high. I mean, I think, you know, it's probably obscene that you can't run as I said, that you can't run an effective presidential campaign for less than half a billion dollars. Right. But the difference between $500 million and 800 million, 900 million, I think it's minuscule. There might even be a diminishing return, because that extra $400, $500 million of spending is not actually overseen by the campaign. It's being done by some guy who's not answerable to anybody, and Lord knows what ad he's going to make that creates a flop, you know, a big kerfuffle for a week that, you know, takes you off your message as a candidate. Well, that'll happen this fall. Some outside group will make an ad that undermines one of the candidates and forces them off their message for a week. It will undoubtedly happen. So, you know, I think oftentimes the best kind of campaign finance reform is the realization that you can only game the system to a certain extent. There's too much money. It's a problem. I'd love to see the law change. I don't think Citizens United created this mess. I've written about this at some length and controversially, but I think you know, the McCain-Feingold reforms in themselves had more to do with it than Citizens United. I think we've been pushing money to the outside the system in increasing amounts with every cycle. And this is the first time since McCain-Feingold that we have had a Democratic incumbent in the White House. And what you are seeing is the full force of conservative wealth in America mobilized against a common enemy. And that was inevitable, in my view, regardless of what the Supreme Court said. But I do think that at the end of the day, campaigns are about what they have always been about. They are about ideas. They are about the ability of a messenger to articulate ideas. They're about the debate. I don't think the micro-targeting changes that fact. I don't think the television changes that fact. If I thought we had changed that fact, frankly, I would go write about the Yankees because it would be more fun. but I still think there's a debate, and I think you'll to what I think you're going to ask me.
Do you think we're having a debate?
Right. To your question, I think we're going to have these 51-49 elections as long as people don't think there's a debate.
But Chris, that's a great question. Are we having a debate? Are we having a debate worthy of the challenges we face?
I worry that we're not. I really do. I mean, I feel like, and I do think this is you know, in this cycle in particular, this is the first presidential cycle where Twitter has been a mature platform playing an important role, as has Facebook and all the other technologies that are out there. And I think where you're really seeing the outsized effects on it is how the news is reported. And I think, you know, as culturally, the people in this room, people in this city, tend to get obsessed with the meta-narratives and every smallest gesture and what it indicates about a decision that has been made or hasn't been made or might be made in the future. And while that's fascinating, I do worry that it obscures, you know, questions like, would we have a second stimulus? What would we do with housing policy? What if unemployment starts going back up? Those are much less sexy questions, perhaps, but I feel like those are the ones that we need to be engaging with. I also, though, am not so pessimistic to think that, like, you know, because of all these technologies, we're only going to have meta conversations here going forward. But I do think it takes a realization on the part of the media in particular that there's a larger sort of debate to be had, and a redoubling of the commitment to.
Let me jump on that, Governor, with a couple of things that we want to get some of your questions here in just a couple of minutes. On Chris's point, we're talking about an economy that is still growing far too slowly. We'll get new jobs numbers on Friday. And you framed this, I thought, well in the beginning, which is this really is a robust debate about the role of government in society generally, but particularly in a distressed economy. Is there a limit if things continue to stagnate? Is there a limit to what government can do, what government investment can do? Do you reach a point of diminishing return there?
Probably. I don't think we're anywhere near it.
Nowhere near it.
And I don't say, I know that the narrative is that liberals say that the stimulus wasn't big enough, but
do you believe that?
Oh, of course I do. But almost everybody around the table at the time believed it. Mm-hmm. What we were working on, and I was very involved in it, was a much bigger stimulus that had none of the tax cuts in it. Because none of the economists were advising us that the tax cuts that were proposed had any economic stimulative value. It had a lot more in infrastructure. It had a little bit more in education. And the compromise that was reached was to scale it down so there wouldn't be sticker shock, and to have a third of it dedicated to tax cuts, because that's what the Republicans in the House said they would have to get a vote, and the president wanted a bipartisan bill. So he agreed to that, and then not one Republican voted for the bill. And that should have been the lesson for what was going to come later on. But the practical effect of the stimulus was, I can tell you at home, 100,000 people can trace their paychecks to the stimulus that we got in Massachusetts. The fact that we have been able to sustain a promise I made to invest in education year after year after year at historically high levels, even when the bottom was falling out of the rest of the state budget, is because for a couple of those years we had stimulus help. The fact that we're making the changes we are in to address the achievement gap in the public schools is because of the race to the top. That's in the stimulus. Stimulus had the largest energy bill in the history of the United States in it. And a whole lot is happening in alternative energy. So if there is a limit, we haven't come to it yet. But I think there's an issue we have in this country, and a false choice we've been talking about whether we can have a stimulus or a deficit reduction instead of a stimulus and deficit reduction, and we can have both.
Maria, to that point, if you were to find, let's say in a second Obama term, if that comes to pass, if the president has said in an interview that maybe the bubble will burst and there'll be more bipartisan cooperation, what do you think the Democratic Party needs to be prepared to absorb as sacrifice, as a real compromise, in order to get the combination of more government investment and deficit reduction as a kind of a balanced approach? What do you think is necessary?
Well, it's interesting because we've already seen that, and this has been a big criticism of the president going into the whole negotiations of the debt deal, which is that he was always seen as being much more willing to give ground than the Republicans were. But so with that in mind, I actually think that the Democrats, in terms of trying to be reasonable, the party, the president, would actually be willing to put real things on the table the way that it was supposedly being done with the grand bargain. As we all know, there was a grand bargain. Republicans will deny it, that nothing was ever on paper. But that grand bargain, from what I understand, included...
yes, it was on paper.
There you go. Included entitlement reform, included all of these things that were sacred cows for Democrats. So I do think that there is a willingness on behalf of Democrats to make sure that we are putting in our piece, but I don't think there's a willingness to give in now, especially when we know there's a Republican Party who really doesn't want to get anywhere near a bargain with this president, and that the only thing that they want to do is see him defeated in November.
All right, let's hear from the audience a little bit. Good question about the 2016 landscape, and I'm going to start with you, Governor. Are you contemplating a run for president?
No.
Not even thinking about it?
You want me to say it again?
Yeah, I mean, that's what we typically do. We go round and round here a little bit.
Okay,
You're not
everybody,
contemplating.
let me just break it to you now. Is everyone ready? Yes. I am going to finish my term in 2014 and return to the private sector.
Right.
If there's anyone here who has ideas about things I might do in the private sector. I will be looking for ideas.
So is that a Sherman-esque statement? Will not pursue, would not accept?
That's a Sherman-esque statement.
All right, no president. So, given that, 2016, what's the landscape like on the Democratic side?
I don't believe him for a second.
Matt, you cynic. You just said you believed in all this stuff about, not micro-targeting. What do you think the landscape? Who goes into 2016, win or lose this year, into 2016 looking
I don't know. I don't know. There are people who plan that far in advance. I suppose if you're going to run for president, you have to. There's some terrific governors who are interested in thinking about it. I think they should get to make their announcements when they're ready to make their.
No, that's not how we like to do it.
But I mean, there may be some surprises.
Chris, who do you like? Who do you like out there? What do you think the lineup is right now?
I think 2016 is so far away. I mean, I was reading the article in the Times about Mitt Romney's experience after 2008 and how 2009, 2010 were really a period where he was thinking through what he was going to do, was not going to run, and it was a perfect reminder that we can read tea leaves all day or try to read tea leaves all day, but we have no idea where it's going to go. I think the good news is there are a good number of candidates that a lot of people or potential candidates that a lot of people are excited about, but we don't even know who they
Maria, help me out here. I mean, is it Hillary Condi? Is that what we're looking at? Come on.
Well, I used to work for Hillary, so I'll just leave it at that.
Yeah, so you're encouraging. Matt, how do you see it on both sides? Because there's a pretty deep bench on both sides.
Well, I'll fill in the blanks for Governor Patrick. I think at least two governors who are clearly looking at running for president are Governor O'Malley and Governor Cuomo. I mean, by all their actions, you have talked to them. And tell us if hang up the phone if we're wrong. But I think that's pretty much that seems very obvious.
And there's a lot of people in the Clinton world who would like to see Hillary Clinton run.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Joe Biden wants to run. I know, but he wants to run. That's what they say. I know what I read. I don't know that for a fact. On the Republican side, you've got this whole crop of governors. I mean, this is how it works, right? You get a downtime, you get this whole mess of governors swept in, and then every one of them thinks they can be president. So you have, probably half a dozen Republican governors elected in 2010. Or before, who are going to be thinking seriously about their potential. But what interests me right now, because I agree with Chris, I'm not a big projector of things. I always feel like the beauty of politics is we all get to find out at the same time. There's no leaking of it. It's like you find out who wins when they win. I don't care who's going to win. What does interest me is, I think the losing party in this campaign is about to go through a wrenching debate. That's not always true. Sometimes parties retrench. Sometimes they have small skirmishes or power struggles. I think in either event, and I may write about this before the election, but in either event here, I think you're about to have I think it's getting harder for parties anyway to have cohesion of vision because the electorate's so independent and institutional loyalties are so waning. And I think the Republican Party clearly has a real a sort of crisis, not just a demographic crisis, but an ideological crisis. But the reason these guys don't give in on taxes in Washington in any shape or form isn't because of Grover Norquist. It's not because Grover Norquist is holding a pledge. They don't need anybody with a pledge. It's because they don't know what else they believe. That's it. That's become the extent of the Republican program, basically, and a bunch of social issues. They know they have to figure this out. I mean, Paul Ryan is the beginning of, I think, a very difficult idea. His ascension is the beginning of a very difficult idea.
I do think primary politics plays a role for a lot of these conservatives.
Yeah, no, there's political reasons, but I'm just saying, like, that is the bottom line. That's what the whole thing is about. And I think on the Democratic side, there's a real populism. There's sort of a DLC moment coming if they lose here. A question about. I think there are a lot of Democrats in parts of the country who are as you alluded to, are very disturbed, as you were talking about. They'll talk to you about it privately, very disturbed at the anti-business message. They will blame defeat for that.
So this is another question from the audience, which I get so often, which is whether the changing demographics, and I would add to the question, not only the demographic changes, but also just the real frustration with politics, is it fertile ground for a third party, Governor? Do you see any possibility for that?
I don't know. I have, look, the political narrative is stale. The electorate knows it. This business of trying to put people in a box, people don't fit in a box. Voters know that about themselves. They don't expect that of candidates, and they can tell when the candidates are trying to wedge themselves into a box because that goes right at the inauthenticity point, and folks see a fraud every time. Every time. candidates always think they can outsmart them. Does that mean there's a third party that might come along? I don't know. I think that when you call yourself a Democrat or Republican, if you are the real deal and you come to the electorate as the real deal, you get a better chance than not, I believe. And so I think, you can do that within the party system or...
Chris, do you see any movement for this?
I think there's a very small but still significant chance that there's a third party that emerges, but it's not in the center. I think it's on the far right. I think that the Republican Party as a party has just drifted so far right, and there are still, one hopes, some reasonable voices in the party that are in the center who just look at Tea Party conservatives who are totally anti-government and still so socially conservative on issues where the most Americans, take marriage equality as a great example, are clearly shifting in an opposite direction. So if a third party emerges, I would not expect it to really necessarily emerge from the center, but more from the extreme right of the Republican Party breaking apart. But a very, very small chance.
I don't know. That's possible, but I don't think it would be viable in any way. And I know that would essentially guarantee that the Republicans lose every election, from here on out, which would be fine with me. But I don't think that our political infrastructure is set up or constructed in a way to support a third party. And we've seen it through, the party system. We've seen it with the financing. We've seen it with basically everything. Every third party that has emerged has essentially failed. But
here's a question that I'll take, but anybody can comment. What does it say about Joe Biden's standing in the administration that he was moved off of prime time? There's an easy temptation to look for daylight between the president and the vice president, and there certainly have been areas of tension, certainly between the staffs. Gay marriage would be one issue, and the vice president getting ahead of the president on that, on a certain program that I'm very fond of. But, the reality is that football happens, and you can blame us at NBC because that's what's really affecting the order of things, and why tonight is Clinton impacted by football, and they're a little bit more compressed. So I also think that the other party, the Republicans, do not have a Bill Clinton figure, and I don't know. Does anybody see it differently? Is Joe Biden getting a raw deal here?
Republicans don't have a recent former president.
They do, Governor. I don't think they have him with 69% favorable ratings that they want at the convention, and President Bush did not want to go to the convention as well. So there's another question here that I think is interesting. I'm not trying to just tee you up here. There's a lot of Democrats here. This is a good question. A lot of discussion is focused on Democratic identity issues and President Obama's challenges on that issue. What about the Republicans' identity issue as it relates to Romney? Do you think these incredibly conservative Republicans are embracing a northeastern moderate Republican candidate? Aren't they extinct in D.C.? And Matt, it is interesting, isn't it? All of these cross currents in the conservative movement right now and the Republican Party right now, somebody who the party is still just perhaps warming up to, who is seen as much more of a moderate and now describes himself as severely conservative. There is an identity issue there.
There is. It's interesting. I've read that President Clinton was the one, I have no reason to doubt it, that President Clinton was the one who advised that the sort of flip-flop, the authenticity issue on Romney wasn't the way to go, that sort of privilege of being out of touch. President Clinton knows what he's talking about. I think there is, though, it does remind me very much of 2004. I think there is an issue here about his core conviction. And I would venture to say, I've been covering presidential campaigns, but this is my fourth. You've probably been doing it at least that long, right? And I've never seen a less known or less knowable nominee to this point. I don't think his own party has a strong sense of who he is. I don't think America has a strong sense of who he is. And I don't think that necessarily is that could work to his advantage because he's going to have a bunch of debates in the fall season, and he may come off as a guy people really want to vote for. I think, a lot of the question around this campaign is how good and attractive an alternative is he at a time when the president has a ceiling on his own popularity because of on his own job performance, simply because of the economic conditions. But I think there's a tremendous amount of confusion inside the Republican ranks and in the country at large about what Mitt Romney believes. I think he's probably, my guess is, I don't know him. They haven't let him within 5 feet of me. My guess is,
Nor will they.
nor will they, probably. I hope they do. But my guess is, that he is he's a management consultant. My guess is that he's more of a technocrat than we've seen as a nominee in a long time. But I do think that is the central question now going forward for 2 months is how well do people get a sense of Mitt Romney? How does he come across? And do they like what they see? I think that is a major question here.
And you could see Governor Romney on Meet the Press this Sunday.
And so there
Which so perhaps get to know him a little bit better.
Tell him I said hey, and he should come do an interview with me when he's done.
Hey, buddy, I'm worried about my own program. Okay, I've been trying for a long time to get him on. Governor, I want to let you have the last word. The governor of Massachusetts, a high-profile Democrat, and in the spirit of this gathering of the Kennedy Library, the Kennedy tradition of fidelity to robust public discourse and public service. Talk about the meaning of the next 2 nights, the meaning of this election, and the legacy of this president's Democratic Party and how it wants to push forward today. I'll give you about 10 seconds for that.
This feels like getting ready for the convention. Well, we were at an event yesterday, I think it was, for the Edward M. Kennedy Institute. And I said of Senator Kennedy what I will also say of John Kennedy and their brother Robert. What they represent for me is something rare in politics, and that's real political courage. The business is full of people interested in accumulating political capital, but there's almost nobody willing to spend it. It's as if you're more interested in sort of getting and holding on to the jobs, the point I was making about Mitt Romney, than actually doing it. And what we need and what leadership requires is your willingness to spend that capital, to show that political courage. And I think that's a message that comes through over and over again through the multiple times I've been in the Kennedy Library. It's a great example of the service this family has brought, and it's a real challenge to those of us who aspire, I'm going to juxtapose 2 terms that don't go together, aspire to the humility of serving serving the public, because service does, I think, mean sacrifice, and that means spending some of that political capital to actually leave your community and your country better than you found it.
Governor, all of you, thank you very much, and thank you.